name is Adam, and we'll be joined by our other member, Marcus, very shortly.
And our group is going to do about a video presentation about East India Company for the subject State-Owned Enterprise.
So basically for this assignment, we'll be talking about a few different criteria that have been mentioned by our lecturer, Hanim, such of which are including the background and history of the company, the ownership structure of the SOE or the East India Company, as well as the problems that they faced and also the solutions that they came up with to overcome the problem. Also at the very end, we will be giving our own recommendations about the overall conduct of the SOE itself. So we do hope that you enjoy the video and please stay tuned. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Walwashini. Today I would like to talk about the background of East India Company. Today I would like to emphasize on what is East India Company, when and why it was established, and how British entered the East India Company. So I would like to start from what is East India Company. East India Company is an English company formed for the exploitation of trade with East, Southeast Asia and India. It was started as monopolistic trading body so that England could participate in the East Indian spice trade. And the East India Company also traded cotton, silk, indigo, saltpeter, tea, and also transported slaves. And when was East India Company was established? The East India Company was incorporated by the Royal Charter on December 31st in the year of 1600. It became involved in politics and also acted as an agent of British imperialism in India in the early of 18th century to the mid of 19th. Okay, adding on to the point, I would like to emphasize briefly on the self-trade, slave trade, and also the tea, which was the imported goods from the East India Company. So in the beginning, early of 1620s, the East India Company began using slave labor and transporting enslaved people to its facilities in the Southeast Asia and India, as well to the island of Saint Helena in the Atlantic Ocean and west of Angola. Okay, although some of those enslaved by the company came from Indonesia and West Africa, but the majority came from the Mozambique or especially from Madagascar, and they were primarily transported to the company's holdings in India and Indonesia. A large-scale holdings in India and Indonesia made by the company was prevalent from the year of 1770s and ended in the year of it was started in the early of 1750s and ended in the year of 1770s. And adding on at the exporting goods of the tea at the mid of century to the cotton goods trade, while the tea became an important import from China. In the beginning early of 19th century, the company financed the tea trade with illegal opium exports to China. The Chinese opposition that trade precipitated the First Opium War, which was from the year of 1839 to 1842. So, this made the Chinese defeated the expansion of British trading privileges. And why East India Company was established? Okay, it was initially created in the year of 1600 to serve as a trading body for English merchants, specifically to participate in the slave trade. It later added such items as cotton, silk, indigo, saltpeter, tea, and opium to its wares, and also participate in the slave trade. And as I said, I would like to emphasize on how British entered the East India Company. Okay, the British East India Company was a privately owned company which was established to create profitable trade with the countries in the region of Asia called the East Indies. And it became one of the most powerful mercantile organizations in the world by maintaining a monopoly on the importation of exotic goods, as I said, notably cotton, tea and silk was their main exporting goods. And it was from India to Britain. And the East India Company also maintained a standing military which was used in many cases to consolidate and enforce local entity in Indian territories.
Alright, so thank you Manu for your explanation of the background history as well as the definition of the East India Company. So hello there, my name is Hanim and I'll be talking about the corporate governance of the East India Company as well as some of the problems that they have faced throughout their history. Also give perhaps solutions to overcome that problem or for us to look back and evaluate what they have done towards their company. So stay tuned. Thank you.
Okay.
Alright, so now I'll be talking about the corporate governance of the East India Company. So for this part, I'll be breaking it off into two parts, which is 1600s until 1765 and then 1700s to 1765 onwards. So the main reason why I'm doing this is because, as you all may know or are aware, that the East India Company started off as a privately owned entity, and by the year 1777 it became a state-owned enterprise, a fully state-owned enterprise, because prior to that it was still partially owned by both the state and the government. So basically in the year 1600s, when it was first chartered by 16 merchants, individual merchants with the royal charter by Her Majesty the Queen, it basically made their own corporate governance. So before that, corporate governance is how a company or a corporation processes it's been directed and controlled through a rigorous process. So that is basically corporate governance. So basically in the year 1600 to 1765, the EIC created its own governance largely out of its own initiative. So one of the main reasons why so is, like I've mentioned before, it is a fully privately owned corporation and entity. The state played very minimal and even non-interventional role. This was limited to providing the EIC with a framework of laws, namely the Royal Charter and contract law, with which the EIC was able to fashion its own legal arrangement and makes its own law.
Okay. 1, 2, 3.
Alright, so one of the many reasons, or the other main reasons why the British Empire wanted to take control over the East India Company was that the state or the British Empire thought that the East India Company EIC was doing things or making things out of their hand or making decisions that they were not supposed to be made. Because one of the examples is that the EIC was waging wars, forging independent foreign policies and entering into treaties with sovereign powers in India out of its own control, meaning that the state thought that the EIC was doing the power of the state instead of the state itself, the British Empire, doing it for them. So these powers were seen to be the same as what a state should do and not a private trading company. So that is why one of the many reasons why the Regulatory Act was implemented, as well as the East India Company Act of 1784 created a board of control under royal direction to oversee and approve all approaches or even dispatches between the EIC and native powers, meaning that now there's a board of control to oversee the directors and all the decisions that were being made by the EIC between the company and also India. Now, the directors were required to secure the approval of the board of control for any decisions that they made regarding India. Right, so like I mentioned before, they started off as a decentralized type power of a corporation because the power was going everywhere and this caused a lot of problems to the EIC. And now they have come together to form a more centralized governance or centralized power due to the presence of the board of control to oversee everything, and every decision must be made through the board of control. Now, to explain further about decentralization and also centralization, I will give the stage over to Marcus for him to explain further. Thank you.
1, 2, 3.
Hello, my name is Marcus Tan, and today I'm going to talk about the transformations from the decentralized to the centralized model. So first thing, we're going to talk about the decentralized styles of the organizations. So basically, the first two things that comes to our minds is that there's a lack of harmonizations, like in terms of the structure and time frames of cross-cutting operational and government policies. So like monitoring systems are dispersed and piecemeal. And the second thing is about like the model suffers from a lack of monitoring and oversight of the group and of a comprehensive strategic approach. So basically this is where the control is spread out. So you don't have one person who is the chairman, the CEO, and the president. You have the people in different positions like this, so that the decision-making power is somewhat spread out. You end up with something called loosely coupled systems. So instead of an assembly line where it's tightly coupled and everything is directly affecting the other, a loosely coupled system is where the piece is still connected, but the connections is more of an independent connections. So if one team has a problem that is not likely to directly affect the other teams, they might feel some influence eventually, but other teams can keep working. So long for short, the downside is that the coordination is not automatic, and teams have to learn over time to get the teams communicating between and among the team, so that they are not just working in a completely isolated, isolated fashions. They have to work all together as well as times. Yeah, I think we messed up already.
No,
the first thing is like, I think it's...
I did.
Yeah.
1. You finished the first page or not?
I finished already, but just now I already paused a little bit because I couldn't read the sentence.
You want to continue the second page?
Should we do it again?
Okay.
You okay or not?
Yeah, I'm okay.
You want to sit or not?
No, I'm fine.
I feel bad.
No, it's fine.
Look at you.
1, 2, 3.
So this is where the control is spread out. You don't have one person who is the chairman of the CEO and the president. You have people in different positions like this, so that decision-making power is somewhat spread out. You end up with something called a loosely coupled system. So instead of an assembly line where it's tightly coupled and everything is directly affecting the other, a loosely coupled system is where the pieces are still connected, but the connection is more of an independent connection. So if one team has a problem that it's not likely to directly affect the other teams, they might feel some influence eventually, but other teams can keep working. So long for short, the downside is that coordination is not automated, and teams have to learn over time to get better at communicating between and among the team. So they're not just working in a completely isolated fashions. They have to work all together as well at times. And let's talk about the centralizations. Now the outside of a centralized style of organization is control and stability. So in fact, the whole thing is designed for control. Centralized power and authority where it's concentrated in a single individual or a small group of individuals. In fact, the telltale sign you're dealing with a centralized type of organization is where the top bosses is the president, CEO, and the chairman of the board. That's highly centralized authority under one person, and as a result of all of the power, authority, and the decision-making power are held in that person's hand. So, a lot of times when you see is quite a bit of top-down communications where the persons in the top positions make decisions and hands the communication down, hands the decisions down, and the communications flows down the chains of command all the way eventually down to the people at the front line of the organizations. So in that way, you have what we call the classic hierarchy. You have all these levels represented in like in the military styles where you have the top general, so to speak, the top officers, and then all the middle people, and then finally the frontline supervisors and frontline employees. So it's a pyramid, if you will. They facilitate, and the last point is like the advantage of transformations to decentralized is because they facilitate the definitions of objective, the implementation of incentive, and the allocations of responsibilities. The fact that the functions of owner and public policymaker can be separated and there are no multiple owners following disjointed strategies facilitate management policy designs and the identifications of the objective and responsible individuals. Identifying the objectives and the people in charge will lead to a better monitoring and help establish in detail the reasons for failure to achieve goals should this happen. This is true, for example, of UK shareholder executive and Finland. With regard to the objectives, centralized model can help to differentiate between social and economic compacts, thereby measuring them in providing differential financing. This has occurred in Chile and Peru.
Thank you. And
Alright, thank you Marcus for your explanation of the decentralization and also centralization. So basically the Regulatory Act, the East India Company Act, all those acts were a form of direction or form a way for the state or the British Empire to take control of the East India Company. So this is because, like I say again, the problems that they were facing, the East India Company were facing, were getting bigger and out of their control, out of their hands, because they don't have enough support to help them overcome those problems, bribery, abuse of power, and many more. So basically the problem here is that should the government or should the state at that time play an important role or should have something to say during that period of time before it went overboard. So from our point of view, the government or any state should always be aware about the private entities that were operating offshore from their country or state. Because one of the many reasons is that many of these companies are more decentralized in nature, meaning that the order or the direction of power can come from anywhere and also go from anywhere. This is because they don't have a centralized body to oversee or overlook whatever they are doing. So in the case of the EIC, it started off as a private company, thus having a decentralized nature or scope of power, the control or the direction of power, and at first this made everything very smooth and easy because of the absence of bureaucracy, but at the same time when time went on and the problems became larger and larger, this decentralized type of power was not really beneficial to them because of the fact that there were no main body or board of controls to oversee them and tell them that what they were doing is wrong. So in our perspective or in our opinion, the solution to the problem was that the state or the British Empire should have made an earlier move to make the EIC and SOE or State Management Enterprise because of the many benefits that the EIC were giving to the British Empire. Some even argue that the reason why the state or the British Empire wanted the EIC under the government is because there is one way for them, the British Empire, to expand their influence and territory, because at the same time countries like Spain, France and even the Dutch were expanding their influence towards Asian countries, Southeast Asia. So India was and is one of the biggest Asian countries, so the British really wanted that influence, and it was made easier because the EIC was already there in India, trading partners with them. So there are a lot of reasons why we can say about why the British Empire wanted the EIC, made them an SOE, but if we look at them from a corporate governance point of view, it is really sad to see that the British Empire or the state didn't make an earlier move to overcome those problems. Only later, that when the EIC asked for help, then only they realized that they really needed help. So that's all from us. I hope you have, or the audience have gained something from this video presentation, and that's all from us. Thank you.